In today's card tutorial, I'm going to be creating 2 friendship cards using the Friendship Leafy cluster from Simon Says Stamp. Hi everyone, I'm Mindy Eggen and welcome to my channel. I would love it if you subscribed, liked this video, and shared it with your friends. Now here is a look at the bundle that I'm using. This is the Friendship Leafy cluster. It has a stamp set, stencil, and coordinating die, which is one of my favorite combinations. I'm going to start off by stamping both of the images onto some Hammermill cardstock. I don't end up using the smaller one, but I do complete it, and I'm just going to end up saving them for future projects. I just want to make sure when I'm spacing them on this piece of cardstock, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, that I'm leaving enough room so I can, 1, ink blend it without overlapping too much, and also 2, be able to leave space for my dies. Now I am starting off by inking them up with flannel ink. This is a light gray ink. Whenever I'm going to be stamping an image and then stenciling over the top of it, I like to start with a light gray ink and then leave it in my Misti stamping tool to stamp it again later. One of the reasons for this is sometimes black ink can take a while to dry, and I really don't have patience for that. With using a light gray ink, I don't have to worry about dry time. It typically will dry pretty fast. And also I can choose to leave it gray or add that bold black line afterwards. Now, one of the reasons with the wait time on the black ink is that I want to ink blend over the top and not worry about my ink smearing. So it's kind of one of the reasons why I like to start in the gray. So I went ahead and kind of secured this down to my glass work surface using a rolled up piece of Post-it tape. And then I'm lining up the first layer of the stencil. I'm going to apply one of the brand new colors from Simon Says Stamp, and this is the Dew Ink Pad. This is in their Positively Saturated ink line. I'm using a large blending brush, and when I pick up the ink, I'm tapping off on the work surface. Since these are brand new ink pads, I don't want to come in too oversaturated. So if I picked up too much ink with my ink pad or my blending brush, I'll tap off the excess a little bit so I can come in a little bit softer. So once I did the first layer of the stencil, I rotated my card and I'm doing the smaller image. I just want to make sure that I am blending with my brush to cover the entire open area of the stencil. And you may notice that I am using some Post-it tape to mask off the other areas of the stencil so I'm not getting any overlapping lines that I don't want. Now I'm bringing in that second layer of the stencil, lining that up and kind of holding it down and also masking off with that Post-it tape. And I'm going to bring in a darker color. This one is Mist. There are 3 different shades in this particular trio. Mist is pretty intense. I learned that on a practice sheet I was doing. So I tapped off pretty generously onto my work surface. And even doing that, I'm coming in pretty intense. So if this is intense, you can just imagine what a gorgeous color Raindrop is, which is the 3rd color in this line. So I ink blended that layer, removed my Post-it tape. I'm going to flip this and I'm going to layer on the second layer of the stencil for this larger image. I love how these overlap. Now, of course, when I used that darker shade, I am kind of going over that already stamped and stenciled design. So I thought I would play around with some different color combinations. When I had stamped these, I did stamp 2 panels. I usually will do that, so if I mess up one, I have one ready. But in this case, I just decided to use it to create a second card. So I cleaned my stencil off just using some rubbing alcohol, and I'm going to do the same process where I line up each layer of the stencil. Now the colors that I'm going to use is Seafoam ink. This is a really nice light aqua. I'm using a blue blending brush. Now my blue blending brush, I tried to wipe off as much previously used color that I may have had on it. I tried to wipe off as much as I can. So my Seafoam might not be exactly Seafoam. It's probably got a mix of color on it. But I'm also going to use it on the smaller image. Then I'm going to bring in a light purple. And this is going to overlap that blue and it looks beautiful. I love using these two different shades. If you're going to do something like this, you want to make sure that your two colors overlapping will look good together. So like a red and yellow or pink and yellow or pink and orange or even blue and yellow. So something where they overlap and they're going to create a pretty color once they're overlapped like that. Now with both panels done, I'm bringing it back into my Misti in the same position I had it, and I'm going to ink up these images once again, but this time with the intense black ink. These are really pretty on its own in that light gray, so if you wanted a softer look, you could leave it just like that, but I really wanted that intense black line. So I'm going to do this for both of my panels, just stamping that once again in the intense black ink. Now, in hindsight, I kind of wish I would have stamped this panel in Raindrop ink, which is that third color of the trio. I think adding that really dark shade of green for an outline would have been really pretty. I'm going to use the coordinating die to die cut out both of my images, just holding them down with Post-it tape. And when I die cut them out, I also went ahead and die cut out another layer for each of these sets so that I can add just a little bit of dimension and stability behind the die cut pieces. I wasn't sure yet if I would be adding foam tape behind them, so by just adding that extra layer of cardstock on there is really going to help, especially with that skinny stem down at the bottom. I thought about leaving the backgrounds just a plain white, which would look absolutely beautiful, but I decided to bring in the Regal Hearts background stamp. I do really love adding just subtle interest to my backgrounds. This is a really pretty pattern, so I brought it over to my Misti. I had removed the foam insert because this is a red rubber stamp, and then I'm taking a piece of Hammermill cardstock again. I put some repositionable tape on the back and placed it over my background and then closed the door of the Misti backwards so my cardstock is sticking to the bottom of my Misti. Now I have that perfectly placed, and I'm going to ink up this background in Pebble ink, which is from Concord and Ninth. It's one of my favorite. It's like a light gray brown color. It's hard to describe, but it is a beautiful color, great for subtle backgrounds. So I will stamp 2 panels with this background and that same color. So this stamp set has some absolutely beautiful and touching sentiments to it. If you are looking for a great friendship stamp set, this is it. So I had a couple friends in mind that I want to send these cards to. I love the scripty, so I have friendship and friend or friends, I can't remember. The other bonus thing about this is those 2 larger scripty words have coordinating dies. Again, I absolutely love when there are coordinating dies for my sentiments. So here I'm laying out how I want my cards to be. I'm going to have it so that image is kind of swooping in from the right-hand side. And then I have my 2 sentiments there. There's also 2 smaller ones that I'm going to be stamping right onto the card front for them. I also decided I wanted to do one of my favorite things to do for cards, and that is adding a white border around the image. So one of the cards I'm going to be using the Hero Arts Arches Infinity die, and the other one I'm going to be using the nesting rectangles. So I went through and I played with different sizes, and I was trying to see how small I could go without making it too kind of crowded in there. But I also want to make sure I'm giving myself enough room on the edges to be able to add foam tape to. So out of white cardstock again, this is Hammermill, I lined up that nesting rectangle and the arches, and I die cut them out. So I will have a frame for each card. Now here's a quick look at how my cards are laying out. I absolutely love them, both in the kind of monochromatic color and then in the blue and lilac. So I have the 2 larger words that are going to have the coordinating dies. I'm going to ink them up in the intense black ink. This is the scrap piece of paper that came out of my nesting rectangle. And there was a little bit of leftover adhesive down at that bottom corner. So I had to stamp friendship a second time because that residue kind of was messing up my stamping a little bit. So here I will use that coordinating die cut each of those out, and also die cutting out a separate one from white cardstock because, again, I will layer it together to give them each a little bit of dimension. I brought my backgrounds over to my Splat Box and I'm adding black splatters to my background, but I had forgotten that I wanted to stamp my sentiment on here first. Didn't realize that till after I started splattering, so I'm being very, very careful how I splatter, trying to keep away from that bottom left-hand area where my sentiment's going to go. My brush is a little stiff, so I was able to control my splatters pretty well. Then I'm going to just kind of speed up that drying time with my heat tool. And while those are finishing up drying, I'm going to go ahead and add foam tape behind my frames. So for the rectangles, that frame was pretty easy. But for my arches, the right and left hand side were kind of skinny and didn't fit the full width of the foam tape. So I did use my scissors to trim them down into thinner strips and add the frame all the way around. To stamp the smaller sentiment, I'm bringing these back over to my Misti and I'm using the die cut word, the die cut image, and my frame. I'm using that as a guide so that I know where my smaller sentiment is going to go. Then I just take my time, make sure that this smaller sentiment is lined up straight, and I'm going to ink it up with the intense black ink. You want to be super careful with these smaller words because you don't want to push too hard and risk distorting it. You also don't want to ink it up super heavy either, because if you have maybe a brand new ink pad or you really load it up with ink, sometimes that excess ink can kind of pool and your words it'll almost look like you made it bold. It might kind of add too much ink to these small sentiments. So just be a little careful when you're stamping. Then for adhering these all together, I am going to start by adding in my leaf image. I'm adding liquid glue to the back of these. Now I have my frame placed over the top, but it's not adhered down. I'm using that and the word friendship there as a guide. And then once I have placement, I'm going to just kind of slide it all off. My hand stayed in place and I can just push that down to attach that to the front of the card. So this is one of the reasons why I am constantly saying that tweezers are my best friend, because they come in so handy, especially with situations like this. To finish this card off, I went ahead and removed the backing of my foam tape. I started in the bottom left-hand corner and just let that gently fall onto my background. I also kind of placed my hand over the center panel to make sure that my cardstock isn't curling up a little bit. Then I just push down really well and I can add my die cut sentiment there towards the bottom. I'll do the same thing with the card with the arches. One thing I do want to point out, which I'm sure my recipient is not going to notice and not going to care, but because my leaf kind of overlaps the frame and where the foam tape is, there's just a little bit of extra lift there. There is kind of a bump. It's not very noticeable, but it's also not completely flush. I just wanted to point that out. Like I said, you probably aren't even noticing in the video, but if you're looking for everything to be flush as far as dimension, that right-hand side where the frame overlaps those leaves, it's not completely flush. The recipient of the card is probably not even going to notice. They're going to be more concerned with the beautiful sentiment that is on this card. So I finished up by adding the friends down at the bottom there. And then I went ahead and created 2 side folding card bases out of some heavy cardstock. I like to do side folding. You can do top folding if that's what you prefer. I added tape runner to the top of my card base. And then again, starting down in that bottom left-hand corner, I can attach my card panel there. I am going to add a little bit of an embellishment. These are the rainbow splash drops. There's a couple different ones on here. There's clear. There's the ones I'm using have, I don't know, it's like a, I don't know if I want to say iridescent, but it's like a, looks like a, you know how you have like blowing bubbles and it's got this beautiful like rainbow shine to it? That's kind of what it reminds me of. So it's very subtle, but it's very, very pretty too. There's also some on there that are kind of frosted. So there's a good variety on that sticker set. So this beautiful message reads, "By chance we met, by choice we became friends." And this one says, "I cherish our friendships." I absolutely love these sentiments and will definitely make them a go-to for my card making. I hope you enjoyed today's card projects. I will have links to my supplies listed down below in the video description and over on my blog as well. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you again real soon.